I'm here with Stuart Nash, the MP for Napier and former Labour Cabinet Minister. Kia ora, Stuart, and thanks for talking with us.
Awesome to be here, mate.
Yeah, Stuart, it's been quite an eventful 6-8 weeks for you. How are you doing?
You know, that old beware the Ides of March, I didn't really take that. I thought that was sort of Julius Caesar. Look, it's been fantastic. It's been liberating in a way, because this is the first time since I was elected in 2008 that I've had my weekends back. Because in opposition, you know, there was always school fairs and stuff to do on Saturdays. I was always doing my street corner meetings. In government, you know, the whole time in government, except for the last 6 weeks I've been in cabinet. What happens when you're in cabinet on Friday evening, a big black bag, occasionally two turn up, and I was spending from 8 a.m. in the morning to midnight reading. And so, you know, my wife's loving me being back. I'm loving having my weekends, and it's time. And so it's liberating. I'm annoyed at the way it happened, but the result has, you know, it certainly opens up a whole lot of different doors and avenues.
Well, we'll go through how it happened and that, and you were fired from the cabinet by the Prime Minister for leaking cabinet information to two of your donors. Do you regret that, and what actually happened?
Yeah, I do regret that.
And what happened, I'll say,
Sure. So obviously, I put on an email, a cabinet decision. I absolutely regret that, because as a result of that, I'm now no longer in cabinet, and I had some really important roles in cabinet, not least of which was managing the Hawke's Bay recovery, and we were quite a way ahead of any other region when I lost that portfolio. But what, you know, the narrative seems to have been that there was a cabinet meeting, a decision was made, and then I phoned up a couple of my donors who were big property developers and divulged information that they could then use to their advantage. Nothing could be further from the truth. This was the middle of COVID, remember? So the common rules around making policy and decision making had gone out the window. We were acting at a great rate of knots, and we were dealing with issues as they arose. As the Minister for Small Business, what had happened is that there were some landlords, commercial landlords, that had given SMEs rent relief. There were some landlords that had clauses in their lease agreements that required them to give rent relief. And then there were some who had no such clauses in their agreements. And by and large, there were a couple of companies, a number of companies who owned commercial buildings who weren't giving rent relief in any way, shape or form. The Prime Minister, Jacinda at the time, was being asked about this continuously. What are you doing to give rent relief to SMEs? Justice was dealing with it. They were really dragging the chain on this. It was important. I was on my cosking every week being asked about the same question. So I said to the Prime Minister, can I come up with some work on this? She said, do that. I phoned up two of my very good friends who were also my donors, but also were the largest and the second largest commercial property owners in Wellington. And I'm not a commercial building owner. I mean, I don't have a competency in this area. And said, what do we need to do in terms of coming up with a policy that would give rent relief to SMEs, but also make sure that large multinational tenants weren't screwing over sort of your ma and pa commercial building owners who might own, you know, one or two buildings. We came up with a policy on this, keeping in mind both these guys had already given rent relief to all their tenants. So they were never going to make anything out of this whatsoever. This was not self-serving. It was
and you weren't going to make anything out of this either.
I mean, I don't own any commercial buildings and I don't lease any commercial buildings. So no, this was all about how do we get rent relief to SME owners and operators who weren't getting it at this point in time. I thought I'd got it across the line. I didn't get it across the line, and what I did is, because we developed this policy, which I think was very robust. These guys knew the area. They were experts in this. Together we came up with this policy. I thought I was going to get it across the line. I didn't. After the cabinet meeting and after the policy had been released, I sent an email to these guys saying, sorry fellas, we didn't get it across the line. This is what happened in the meeting. Now, I broke the cabinet rules. The cabinet rules say you're not allowed to do this. Do I regret that? Absolutely, because I lost my job over it. Keeping in mind it was 3 years previous, and it only came out 3 years afterwards, but the bottom line is I broke the rules. But do I regret trying to come up with a policy for these SME owners? Not in any way, shape or form. I mean, as a cabinet minister, and certainly with my portfolios, I often called friends, acquaintances, contacts, my networks, to ask them for advice in areas that I didn't have a core competency in. Now, you know, sometimes they acted as sounding boards, sometimes they gave me ideas which I tested out. But, you know, as a minister, you're not an expert in every field. you go to the experts and you seek their advice. It doesn't mean that they have bought any favours. I have never acted in a way where any of my donors have ever benefited from having donated to my campaign. In fact, there's been a couple of instances where donors have put their name forward for boards that I have been in charge of, and I've had to say, sorry fellas, I can't put you forward because you are a donor, there's a perception of a conflict of interest here, and for both of us, we've got to stand back. So some of my donors have actually, I won't say been harmed, but have actually not got onto boards which they would have been highly capable and competent on because they donated to me. So I was never going to make any money out of this. These guys had already done the right thing. They'd been very active in the development of this policy, and all I was doing was communicating the result, but I did it in a way that actually, in hindsight, broke the Cabinet Manual.
So how would you have handled it if you could have it all over again, with feeding back to them?
I would absolutely have worked with them to come up with a policy, because the policy we came up with, I thought, was spot on, as did they. In the end, I suppose what I would have done is I would have waited till the policy came out, i.e. the one we agreed on in Cabinet. If they had then called me and said, hey, what happened to our proposal? I would have said, sorry fellas, it didn't get through, and I would have left it at that. I certainly wouldn't have put it down on an email, and I probably wouldn't have proactively called them. I would have just said, hey, you win some, you lose some, we lost this one. Let's move on and influence what we can.
Yeah. Now we'll get into your resigning as police minister and that, but I just want to ask you, around that whole thing of being fired and that, do you feel in any way, at any stage, you were treated unfairly, and why do you want to tell your side of things now?
Oh, look, it's... the rules are the rules. The Cabinet Manual is a guideline. It's not a legislated piece of, it's not an act of Parliament that means if you follow it then you end up in court or whatever. They are guidelines, but the Cabinet Ministers are expected to follow them. I did break the rules. Other ministers have broken the rules themselves, but in this particular situation, it is what it is. I accept that, and I've moved on.
And the process of being fired, was that fair?
Oh, look, it is what it is. It doesn't matter if it's fair or unfair. Like I said, it's liberating in a way. I'm disappointed in the way it happened, but it means that, as mentioned, a whole lot of other opportunities are opened up.
So one could say that your cabinet troubles began when you resigned as police minister after revealing on radio that you had spoken to the police commissioner 2 years prior about a court case and also criticising a judge's decision. You were once again there deemed to have breached the cabinet manual. Do you accept that as well? Because in the beginning you didn't think you had done anything wrong, but I think, has that changed? Do you think you did?
Look, the interesting thing is politicians are not supposed to criticise the judiciary. In our country, the judiciary are held up as sort of, beyond reproach. And, the firearms legislation is something that I took through as a Minister of Police. I spoke, obviously, a number of times on this legislation in Parliament. And because of the nature of how this came about, I spoke in the community a lot about the changes we were making. I felt that the judge who had imposed the sentence on a person who had broken quite, egregiously the legislation, I felt that the sentence this person had been given was manifestly unfair, i.e. it was far too lenient compared to the breaches and compared to what I had been saying in the community. Now, I suppose the question is, if the minister responsible for that legislation can't criticise a judgment, then who can? The police can't, but, technically, well, not technically, I am not supposed to criticise judges. But who holds judges to account in the end? Now, I got that wrong because I did criticise a judge. There was another way about it. Perhaps I could have gone to the Prime Minister and said, hey, look, this is a manifestly unfair judgment. It's way too light. It's not what I had planned. It's not what I had communicated in all my speeches. Keep in mind, judges can use, when deliberating, what ministers have said in their speeches during Parliament. But, again, I got that wrong. Phoning Andy, that is something, for Andy Costa, the police commissioner. Police commissioner, that is something I completely underestimated. So when I called him, I wasn't the Minister of Police. Andy is a good friend of mine. He had been heavily involved in the firearms buyback. I gave him a call, and as Andy himself said, he just saw it as someone venting.
Yeah.
That's what I was doing. It was like, Andy, this sentence, this is a guy who had illegal firearms, illegal ammunition, he didn't have a licence, he had other firearms, again, without a licence, and the judge said, because you're not a gang member, I'm not going to send you to jail. Well, that was never part of the rationale. The rationale was we want people to do the right thing. If you have illegal firearms and illegal ammunition, and certainly if you didn't have a licence, then there was an expectation, and certainly I'd communicated this very, very clearly during the gun buyback and during the legislative process.
Yeah.
You faced up to 5 years in jail.
So who should judges be accountable to?
I don't know. And this is the thing. I mean, they're obviously accountable to the public.
Yeah.
But if a minister responsible for the legislation that's gone through, who knew it intimately, can't criticise a judge's decision, then who can? And it's a question that maybe needs to be debated by society. Now, I did get that wrong. I knew the rules at the time.
Yeah.
So this was a calculated risk by me, which absolutely did not pay off. And I regret that. But what I woefully underestimated is making a phone call to Andy when I wasn't Minister of Police and asking him, are the police going to appeal this? They didn't appeal it. Andy Costa, the police commissioner, is a very smart man. I knew that a phone call from me to Andy was never going to sway him. A, I haven't got that influence. B, I haven't got that legislative influence. Yeah. But C, as mentioned, this is just a guy venting to a commissioner who had similar interests. But, again, I got that wrong. And that's why I tendered my resignation in the police portfolio.
Because you kind of outed yourself. I mean, it was you that brought it up on a radio station. So do you regret having done that?
I do. I mean, anything that I've done that has caused me political harm, but also in a way government political harm as well, then I regret doing it. I shouldn't have, and I way, as mentioned, I way underestimated the influence a call to Andy Costa would have had as someone who wasn't the Minister of Police in terms of the fuss it would have caused. So yeah, I'm Labor through and through.
Yeah.
I have worked for years and years and put everything, including my family, aside for the good of the Labor government. Anything that I do that causes damage or harm, no matter if it's short or long term, to the Labor government, I regret doing.
Yeah. Now, when you resigned, you kept your other portfolios, but you were subsequently demoted down the Labour rankings after it came to light in September last year that as MP for Napier, you had contacted a senior official at MB to ask them to look at an immigration case of a health professional in your electorate, and they say you should have gone to the minister instead of going to the official. Tell us what happened there.
Well, we went to a Cherry in my office who's been with me for 8 years and is absolutely fantastic. Former immigration officer in Australia. We do a lot of immigration cases through this office. Well, we used to do a lot of immigration cases through this office. And Cherry, because this is her professional competency, knew who to advocate for and when perhaps the wool was being pulled over our eyes. We had 2 surgeons, not on my electorate, I don't know their names, had been on the waiting list for about 18 months.
So they weren't in your electorate?
Don't think so.
Okay.
No, but they were working at the Hawke's Bay DHB.
Okay, yeah.
And keep in mind, surgeons don't grow on trees, right?
No.
We want as many surgeons as we possibly can.
Yeah.
They had come to my office. Cherry had gone to the minister. She was then told to go to the associate minister. The associate minister said there's nothing more we can do. So as the chief MB minister, I phoned one of my officials and said, who was in charge of immigration, and said, hey, can you take a look at this? We're about to lose these guys. He took a look at it after being sent all the information from Cherry and decided that on balance, these guys should be let through. Again, no personal gain whatsoever. I don't even know the guys' names. Cherry was the one dealing with the case. I just made the phone call. But again, as minister, let alone as local MP, advocating to get 2 surgeons to stay in Hawke's Bay who had very clearly articulated their intention to leave because of what they saw as injustices in the immigration system, i.e. how long it was taking, then, if I can't use my influence to make sure 2 surgeons stay here, then I'm not too sure why I'm here.
But, I mean, as an MP, you advocate for people all the time.
All the time.
Yeah, so what happens? You're a minister, why does that change everything?
Well, apparently what I'd done is I'd circumvented process. So there are two things I could have done. When the Associate Minister came back and said there's nothing more we can do, I could have left it and these surgeons would have gone. What I then did is I went over and above that, and I phoned officials who had the ability to make decisions around this. And because of that, it was deemed that I didn't follow due process. Now, again, we have two surgeons here who wouldn't be here otherwise, but my role as the MP for Napier is to ensure that we get the best quality people living in our region who can really add value, and these two surgeons certainly did.
And the Prime Minister said that this was the final straw, basically your last chance. How did it come about? How did he find out about it and that?
There's a story behind it, but he found out about it. Yeah.
So you think someone dobbed you in, kind of thing?
Well, look, it doesn't really matter. The bottom line is he found out about it, and you know, I was questioned in detail about it, and you know, by not accepting the Associate Minister's course of action that there was nothing more that could be done, I had been deemed to circumvent. I mean, this is all out there anyway.
Yeah.
But again, you know, we now have two surgeons here who are very strong odds that they wouldn't be here if I hadn't done what I did.
Yeah. So after that, being told this is your final warning, did you spend the time like thinking back, is there anything I've done that I should be worried about? And were you quite nervous after that?
I was asked, you know, is there anything else?
Yeah.
And, you know, first of all, I didn't think that I'd done anything wrong by advocating for these two surgeons. And I said, you know, I'm honest, I said, listen, I was on Mike Hosking every week for about 3 years. I'm sure if you trawl back through my Hosking interviews, you'll find something there that I said that I shouldn't have said. But, you know, I have a reputation of getting stuff done, okay? And sometimes I'm the first to admit that I circumvent process. Now, that can have good benefits, but it can also put me at risk.
Yeah.
And, you know, this time, after 5.5 years in Cabinet, there were 3 things I did which circumvented process, which I broke the rules, and, you know, I've paid the consequence, and I accept that.
Yeah.
But as mentioned, I'm disappointed in the way I'm leaving politics,
Yeah.
but I'm very proud of what I achieved over 5.5 years as a Cabinet Minister. Worked incredibly hard under the most trying of circumstances. You know, I had ministerial responsibilities during March the 15th, during Whakaare White Island, during COVID, during the cyclones here, you know, during the recession, well not recession, during the economic slowdown.
Yeah.
So, you know, it was sort of 5.5 years of business as usual agenda, whilst also in the middle of crises trying to come up with solutions. And, you know, I am solution focused. I do like to think that I do get things done.
Yeah.
But, you know, when you're a Cabinet Minister, you are accountable to the people of New Zealand and the Prime Minister. You've got to follow due process, and, you know, there were times when I didn't.
Yeah, because everyone I speak to doesn't believe that you're corrupt or incompetent. They just think you made, as someone said to me, a dumb mistake or a few dumb mistakes. Obviously, your reputation has taken a knock. How do you recover from this?
Oh, look, I've always said that politicians have forgotten 10 minutes after they leave, and that's the way they should be. You know, any politician who believes they're coming in and creating a legacy for themselves is dreaming. You know, people may remember, well, they'll remember the Ardern government as they remember the Key government and the Clark government, but no one remembers individual MPs themselves or even ministers, with a couple of rare exceptions. You know, like I said, I mean, I think my record in various portfolios stands up to scrutiny.
Yeah.
Did I make dumb decisions? I circumvented process, and perhaps I should have known better. Yeah. And as a consequence of that, still trying to get stuff done, never benefiting myself in any way, shape or form, never benefiting any of my donors, always working hard for the people of the Bay and the people of New Zealand, but I should have been a little smarter in ensuring that the processes set out that Cabinet Ministers are expected to follow, that I did follow those.
Do you think you'll be remembered for your body of work or for this?
I don't think I'll be remembered. Again, you know, you come back in 6 years' time and ask the people of Hawke's Bay, do you remember Stuart Nash? Most people will go, who was he? You know, the thing is that I know what I've achieved as a Cabinet Minister. I'm very proud of that. I don't expect to be remembered. I expect Jacinda's government to be remembered at the way we handled COVID, at what we did with firearms, at the way we handled Whakaare White Island. the way that Jacinda and the government handled March the 15th.
Yeah.
But as an individual minister, I don't expect to be remembered at all.
Yeah. So was it a tough decision to retire from politics?
No, it wasn't. Look, a very senior politician on the Labour side came to me and said, there's a way through this. And he outlined 2 other ministers that had been sacked under Helen Clark. And he said, what you do is you stand in Napier again, and if Labour's in government, then you go on the backbench and you work really hard. If National's in government, then you go into opposition and you work really hard for 3, 6, 9 years, for as long as they're there. And then next time there's a Labour government, you come back as a minister. And I said, I've got better things to do with my life than sit in Parliament for 3, 6, 9 or 12 years as a backbench or as an opposition MP in the hope I'm going to make it into cabinet when I'm 64, 65. Yeah. I'm as mentioned, I'm very proud after 5.5 years in cabinet around what I achieved. No regrets whatsoever, apart, well, we all have regrets. Yeah. I do regret sending that email. If the end of my parliamentary career had been when I didn't get back on the list in 2011, then I think I would always be watching the television, listening to politics and gone, what if? Yeah. My team and I worked for 2 years between 2012 and 2014, 2 years, raised a lot of money, campaigned really, really hard to win Napier in 2014. And so having been the MP for Napier for 9 years, absolute privilege and a pleasure. It doesn't get any better than that as a Napier boy. But it's time now for me to go, and I leave knowing that I think I've made a really solid contribution to this country.
Because things probably are still a little bit frosty now with the Prime Minister and that, but you did have a circle of close friends, I know, in Cabinet and that. Yeah. Are those relationships still...
Absolutely, yeah. So Kelvin Davis, Kelvin, his political career and mine have sort of mirrored each other. Well, up until 6 weeks ago. We both got in as list MPs in 2008. We both disappeared in 2011. In 2014, I was the only person to win a seat off the Nats, and he was the only person to win a seat off a sitting MP, Hone Harawira. Yeah. We both got into cabinet at the same time. And so, he's a very good friend of mine and will remain so. Yeah. Just because you stuff up, it doesn't mean your true friends desert you. Yeah. And so, no, I still have great relationships with a number of those guys. And, I wish them, including the Prime Minister. Mm-hmm. He got elected at the same time as me, as did Grant. And so, I consider them friends. I consider them colleagues, and they will be up until the election. And absolutely, I work incredibly hard to ensure that they're back come October the 14th, and anything I can do or I'm asked to do to help with that, I will.
Because you've got politics coming out of your ears. I mean, your family history, your great-grandfather, Sir Walter Nash, 27th Prime Minister of New Zealand. Was it always a given that you were going to get into
Not
politics?
Not at all. In fact, my father tried to dissuade me because, his father, so Sir Walter's eldest son, had died of meningitis during the war. And so Sir Walter took over the role of sort of family patriarch. And Dad saw a lot of politics, saw Walter worked incredibly hard. Family comes second when you're in politics. And, he knew that. I didn't necessarily know that. No one knows what they're getting into when they enter politics. But I hadn't considered a political career for quite a long time. And then I spent 8 years importing and trading petrochemical derivatives. Used to go overseas a lot. And it used to be tonic for the soul because, you'd go overseas, whether it was Europe or the Middle East or occasionally the States or Asia, and you'd come back here and realise that we live in the best country in the world, and I fundamentally believe that. And so I had at a certain point in time, I said, okay, how can I make the best contribution to New Zealand? Is it politics? Is it through business? Is it through some other area? And I realised with my skills, I was a salesman, which is what politicians are, right? I knew how to write. I had ideas around how we could do things better. Thought, okay, let's dip my toes into the political waters, and before you know it, you're there and you're going hard.
Yeah. Now you mentioned you've been you had that stint as list MP, and then from 2014 MP for Napier, and you've spoken a bit about it. But why was it so important to you to represent Napier?
Look, first and foremost, as a list MP, you're at the vagrancies of how well the party does. I mean, we got slammed in 2011, and as a consequence of that, I was out, as were a number of my friends, Carmel Sepuloni, Kelvin Davis, for example. It gives you a base. But the other thing is I'm slightly old-fashioned in the sense that this is my hometown. I mean, my family's been here since 1865. My kids are the 5th generation at Napier Central School, right back to opening day.
Wow.
Representing Napier in Parliament really was a dream of mine because, you know, this is my family city.
Yeah.
I love this city, and the privilege of actually going down to Wellington and representing the interests of Napier and Hawke's Bay, when I say Napier, the Napier electorate in Hawke's Bay, was something that I was really keen to do once I understood about the political process. That's why the team and I worked so hard between 2011 and 2014 to get back.
Because Napier is quite a unique electorate. Apart from the red wave in 2020, the party vote has always been national since 2005. However, the voters elected you from 2014 each election. That's quite odd to have a split vote every time like that.
Yeah.
Why do you think that was? I mean, obviously you'll say because you were a good candidate.
No, well, that's the beauty of MMP, right?
Yeah.
So what people can do is they can say, we want this party to govern, but we want this person to represent them.
Yeah.
And so, you know, whilst I'm always Labour to the core, obviously, you know, I think I worked really hard to ensure that the voice of Napier was heard in Parliament. And, you know, things like my street corner meetings. I mean, a lot of MPs do street corner meetings, but they tend to do them in the last sort of month or two before the election. I did these 40 weeks of the year. I'd be standing out there in the middle of winter in the pouring rain, and people would come along and I'd go, you know, why are you here? But it was always cool because people were always keen to engage. And, you know, this is pre-COVID, you know, 1,000 people got something in their letterbox that said, Stuart Nash is going to be on your street corner. Come and hear what he has to say, or if you've got any issues, come and discuss them with him. And this is when I was, you know, was a candidate, when I was an opposition member of Parliament, and when I was a minister. So still out there, and it kept you grounded. And I think the people of Napier sort of, I think they sort of respected the fact that I was prepared to get out there and engage in a way that, you know, that added value. Also in my office, you know, Cherry's been with me, like I said, for nearly 9 years. The amount of issues that she has solved for Napier people and the way that she has added value to the Napier electorate, you know, under my sort of brand, has been outstandingly good. And I think people, you know, realise that, you know, if you've got a good electoral agent, you've got a good office, and an MP who's passionate about things, then, you know, it works.
Was Parliament, when you first went in there, was it quite a shock to the system?
Yeah.
It's a strange environment.
It really is,
yeah.
So, you know, you can't imagine it. And I'd worked in business at senior levels, but it's like nothing else, it really is. And certainly in Cabinet, the work in Cabinet is just astronomical. It is, you know, it's 100 hours a week. As mentioned, I was working on a Sunday till, well, I refuse to work past midnight on a Sunday, but there's a lot of reading. And one of the things is I always prided myself on reading every single bit of paper that came my way. And so, you know, I hated going into meetings not being informed. On the rare occasion where I hadn't read a paper, I would say to my officials, hey, be aware, I haven't had time to get to this. Talk me through the paper if you want, or but I'll get it back to you with any decisions that are required from this paper within 2 or 3 days. So, you know, it is a phenomenal amount of work. But having said that, it is also the ultimate privilege because you get to change the world, change the country in a way that benefits, you hope, the majority in your community.
Yeah. Now, obviously, becoming a cabinet minister was the pinnacle, and police minister, I think, was the one that you wanted, and you got it. How was that? Because you had some tough times there. You've mentioned Bukari, White Island, you've mentioned obviously the firearms stuff and that as well. Was that the best it could get? Being police minister?
No. I mean, I love being Minister of Forestry. I mean, we restarted the Forest Service, which I'd talked about for many years. But being police minister, the reason I love being Minister of Police is thanks to New Zealand First, actually, in the coalition agreement in 2017, we were promised 1,800 extra police at a point in time where, you know, the previous 3 years numbers had actually dropped. Crime had increased, gangs were out of control, meth was establishing itself in our community. You know, we needed a reset. And so those 1,800 extra police were a godsend. And, you know, I've got to give credit where credit's due. That was thanks to New Zealand First. But But I just think the men and women of the New Zealand Police Service are phenomenal. They really are. They deal with stuff that the vast majority of people have no idea. They keep us safe 24/7. They deal with an amazing array of situations, all the way from mental health call-outs through to preventing crime. And I think all the way up the scale, they are phenomenal men and women who work really, really hard and are very passionate about our community. But I've loved all my portfolios. You know, fishing, we got cameras on boats, and that process is being rolled out, and that was really hard to get across the line. There are other technical stuff around deemed values, which are getting into the weeds now, but really made a difference that I'm really proud about. In forestry, as mentioned, started the New Zealand Forest Service and painted a vision for forestry, which, you know, I'm keen to work with any minister on any side of the government, in any government, to say, hey, look, this is how you implement this in a way that, again, will add significant value. Economic development, the stuff we're doing around government procurement, around the film sector, around industry transformation plans. Love. In fact, if I think back, Andrew, there's not a portfolio that I didn't enjoy, and think that I added some value in.
Because people don't realise you've actually got a Master's in Forestry Science.
Yeah.
So that, and looking back on your CV, and that's been quite a passion of yours, really.
Well, I've got a Master's degree in law, I've got a Master's degree in management, I've got a Master's degree in Forestry Science.
Where do you find the time, man?
Look, I love education. You know, maybe my father would argue I took it a bit too far. But, you know, I wrote a business case for AUT University South Campus, then went and ran that. I mean, education is a great enabler, and we've got to get education right if we're to give people the chance to be the best they possibly can be. And I think that's the fundamental right of every Kiwi. Doesn't matter where you're from, what your background is, who your parents are, where you live. Education is an enabler to ensure that you live your best possible life. But I was our opposition spokesperson for forestry. In 2017, when the Prime Minister was handing out portfolios, she gave me a call and said, said police, fantastic. Small business, yep, right into that. Revenue, yep, I was our spokesperson, so revenue's tax by and large, working very close to the Minister of Finance. And fisheries, I went, I think you mean forestry, Prime Minister. She said, no, Shane Jones is forestry under the coalition agreement. We want you to be fisheries. Like, okay.
But you got it eventually, yeah?
Oh, yeah, well, I got it eventually. And I loved being the Minister of Forestry, I really did. And there's immense value. It's one of those portfolios that's sort of under the radar a little bit, but will play a much greater prominence as we need to start offsetting carbon emissions, etc.
Obviously, the thing now is the retail crime that's happening, and Ginny Anderson, I think, is finding it's tough being police minister, and she came out with a statement, almost like nothing to see here kind of thing in terms of crime and that, which has got a few people stirred up a bit. How do you think she's handling it? You're probably not going to comment on that, but how do you think she's handling it, and what would you do differently now?
Oh no, I think she's doing a great job. You know, I had a certain style in the way I manage my portfolios, which is different from others.
Yeah.
You know, Ginny has brought her own style and her own substance to this. She had worked in police before she took over the role, so she has knowledge of how police works. And, you know, she's doing a good job.
Yeah, because it seems like it went through a stage after you that the portfolio was almost devolved to almost junior cabinet ministers, when if you ask anyone in the country, they would say it should be up there with finance and those sort and health and that. Do you think that was a misstep on the government's behalf to do that?
Look, the Prime Minister had to make decisions. I mean, I asked for portfolios in the second term. I was very keen on an economic development portfolio as we came out of COVID. You know, I understand how an economy works, and I had ideas around how to drive productivity through our economy. You know, we're all wise in hindsight, right? There was a new police minister who had come from a background of victim support, which is where the police were heading. You know, and things change in our communities. But I did really enjoy it. I mean, one of the things I did start, and it's the first time it's ever been done, is I called the Minister Commissioner visits. And what would happen is once every year, the Commissioner of Police, Mike Bush, and in the end, Andy Costa, and I would go around all the districts, and we would sit down for 3 hours and we'd talk to the guys. And I'd do the political speak, Mike Bush or the Commissioner would do the operational stuff, and then we'd get asked questions. And we'd feed off each other. And initially, people were a little bit resident to come forward because, you know, you had your commissioner here as well as the minister. But in the end, once they opened up, it was a really important dialogue for me to understand the stresses of officers on the ground, the commissioner to get really good feedback, and for us both to appear together so people understood that we had their backs. And that's one of the things I'm really proud of. But, you know, the 1,800 officers, we're nearly there, we're rolling that out. There's a whole lot of amazing stuff that police do. As mentioned, I've just got nothing but respect for the men and women in the service.
Well, I've got one opportunity to interview, so I've got a few more questions. Okay. We won't go on forever, but I'm going to take my opportunity. You commissioned that forestry inquiry. There was some criticism at the time that why didn't it include Hawke's Bay, it was just Tairāwhiti. Are you satisfied with the report that's been delivered?
Yes, I am. So there were two major reasons why we didn't include Hawke's Bay, and we only include Tairāwhiti. There had been two cyclones. People forget there was a big cyclone Hale, I think it was called, before Gabrielle, and that was pretty much, not exclusively, but the main area of damage from hail was actually the east coast around Gisborne. There was a lot of slash in that area, a lot of forestry debris out of that area. Gisborne, or the Tairāwhiti district, has a very, very high percentage of highly erodible soils, and forestry had been planted and managed on those soils in a way that we wondered if it was suboptimal. And then it had been harvested in a way that actually, with all that slash, proved that perhaps the harvesting techniques used were not serving the needs of the local community. Wairua was included. If you look at Hawke's Bay, there is a market for slash in Hawke's Bay, and it's called Pampac. They have a pulp mill there, so a whole lot of the slash, or the stuff that was left on the skid sites in Tairāwhiti, was actually brought off the skid sites in Hawke's Bay and down to Pampac. The other thing is there's something called excuse me if I'm getting a little bit technical here, there's something called the NESPF, which is a National Environmental Standard for Plantation Forestry. It's basically the rules that govern forestry operations, and it's the minimum standard. So councils can go higher than that in terms of requiring forestry operations to put in tougher standards, but they can't go below that. We did a big review of that, but we held off consulting on the final draft until after the Tairāwhiti Wairua slash report had come, well, woody debris report had come through, because we thought it was disingenuous to go out there with solutions without hearing what the solutions were up here. Now, some of those recommendations may well feed into the National Environmental Standard for Plantation Forestry that could be rolled out around the country. But I was very satisfied with the terms and conditions and the terms of reference and the people we had on that. The wider you had made, if we had made this really wide, it would have taken a lot longer and not served the purpose, which was short, sharp, and a series of recommendations.
Now, in a nutshell, and not too long, please, but what have been some of the highlights your time as MP and a minister? Well,
first and foremost, representing the people of Napier and Wellington. I've loved that. It's been a privilege and a pleasure. Small business digital boost. That was, again, you say not too long, but there's a lot of them. Okay, digital boost. That was about providing platforms to allow SME owners free to go digital. Forestry, as mentioned, restarting the Forest Service. Fisheries, did a lot of work in there and turning that around. Economic development, the stuff I was doing around government procurement and the industry transformation plans. Revenue, there was some really cool stuff we did there which no one will ever know about, but increased the integrity of the tax system. I'm just trying to think of the other portfolios. Police, obviously.
Yeah, the weapons. And
the firearm reform. I think that's one of these things where there was a thought report done after 1997, I think it was, and they said anything that's done takes 20 years to come into play. And they said if you don't do something now, 1997, then it is inevitable there'll be something along this line. The fact that it took until March the 15th to actually happen was probably a minor miracle in itself. What we did in terms of firearm reforms, I don't think will be seen, well, the full effects won't be seen for another 10, 15 years, but I think it was really important in terms of bringing integrity to the system and getting these MSSAs out. We're the only country in the world to have removed these rifles that are designed for one purpose, to kill people. Yeah. You don't need 20 shots, 50 shots if you're hunting deer or tahr or anything like this. If you're hunting deer, We have the weapons out there at the moment. If you're hunting ducks, you know, there's a shot maximum. If you're hunting rabbits, for example, those firearms are still legal. They're always going to be legal. These are the AR-15, which is the civilian equivalent of the M15, the AK-47. Why do you need an AK-47 in New Zealand? You don't.
Well, we've seen what happens in America. I mean,
amazing,
every day. Yeah,
every day.
Yeah. Now, apart from the recent events, what have been some of your worst moments in Parliament?
You know, it's interesting because I did reflect on this. Someone asked me this a while ago. I can't think of any. And the reason, and I don't know.
I mean, the recent past.
Yeah, I mean, the recent past aside, yeah. I mean, you know, losing my portfolios was definitely a low for me. There's no doubt about that. Not getting back in 2011, that was devastating because I'd put everything into that. And, you know, I'd worked really, really hard. I'd raised money. I'd run a really good campaign. I spoke more in Parliament than any other Labour MP. I'd written more policy than any other Labour MP. And I reduced the sitting National MP's majority by more than anyone. He started off with a majority of 9-3, 9-4, and I reduced it down to 3-5, I think. Still didn't get in, found myself without a job. Again, no point in crying over spilt milk, right? No point in being bitter about this. What you do is you have a beer with mates and you pick yourself up and say, okay, let's chart a course out of here, let's chart a course towards victory, which is what I've always done. You know, I've always, whenever I've come across adversity, it's like you draw a couple of breaths, maybe you're allowed a week of morose, and then you pick yourself up and you go, okay, how do we get out of this, and drive yourself forward.
Is there some relief that you don't have to campaign now?
Look, now that I've made that decision, yes.
Yeah.
I enjoyed campaigning, but I'm looking at what the other guys are going to do, both in my party and both in Napier. Yeah. And there's a lot of street corner meetings. There's a lot of doors to be knocked on, calls to be made, signs to be put up. And I've said that I'll help Mark. I'll be out there putting up hoardings and doing this sort of stuff. But the fact that it's not me driving this, it is a little bit of a relief because I can now concentrate on my post-political career.
Yeah. Because Mark Hutchinson, who you referred to there, he's your replacement, just announced. He was a former campaign manager of yours.
He was.
And has been involved in your campaign for like 13 years or something.
Yeah.
He's got a tough task ahead of him. Obviously, name recognition not so high against Katie Nimmin, who's had a bit of a free hit up until now with no serious opponent. And you beat her last time quite significantly, I think 6,000 votes or something like that. Can he do it, or who do you think is going to win?
I do believe he can do it for two reasons. First of all, Napier in the past has been the sort of seat where you can come in, you can run, you can win it. If you're good, you may end up in cabinet in 6 or 9 years, and then onwards and up. If you don't end up in cabinet, then you can be a local MP like Jeff Braybrook was, for example. Russell Fairbrother was never in cabinet. Before him, Gordon Christie held this for about 24, 27 years, was never in cabinet. We're at a point in time with Gabrielle where you need someone who has very senior experience, who knows how to get things done, has worked in leadership at the highest level to advocate for the people of Napier. In Napier, at this point in time, someone who is going to go really hard but knows how to advocate. And I just don't have confidence that Katie can do that. I do have confidence that Mark can. And keeping in mind I'm in a unique situation is that I was on the campaign trail with Katie last time, so I've seen her competency. And as a constituent, I would rather Mark represented me in Wellington than Katie.
Okay, now speaking of yourself, so what does the immediate and near future hold for you?
Well, still the MP for Napier, so still a lot of work to do.
After the election,
Look, there's a couple of balls in the air at this point in time. I'll head back into the private sector. I mean, I'm a businessman first and foremost. And I'll sit down with Sarah and say, my wife, and say, okay, where do we want to head to from here? Napier will always be home. And so, we're quite clear on that I won't be moving out of Napier to Auckland or Wellington or overseas. It may be that my next role is in Auckland or Wellington. But ever since Sarah and I have been together, which is nearly 15 years, I've always left on a Monday and either come back on a Thursday or a Friday. But now, and Sarah said to me, I understand that, but all I want is our weekends, because she hasn't had that. Neither have the kids. And so, it could be outside of the region, but we'll always live here, and I love the place.
Do you see yourself being a lobbyist or anything like that? Or? been involved with working back in Parliament, but in a different way.
No, the reason I say that is when I went out in between 2011 and 2014, I think I watched Question Time once. And even though I kept in touch with my mates in Parliament, like I said, I've scratched that itch well and truly. I've done that. I don't want to be the guy, calling a minister, either a Labour or National, begging them to see me because I'm advocating on behalf of a client. Don't get me wrong, the government relations guys, I believe, play a really important role. I know they've taken a little bit of a hammering recently, but I believe they play a really important role. And large companies that don't have a government relations presence, I think, are doing themselves a disservice. But I don't see myself playing that role.
Here's another thought for you. Local government elections in 2025. Could we see you as a candidate for Napier City or Regional Council?
Look, it's funny you say that because I got a call from someone who is very well networked into local government. And this person said to me, my advice is take a year off and then run for the Mayor of Napier. And I said, no way, no way. Not at this point. Look, it may be.
So are you saying definitely you won't? Or
No, this time, definitely not.
No,
I'm not saying never, but I want to go out there. What I said, I want to work with people that I like in a company that I respect in an industry I'm passionate about. And, like I said, there are a couple of balls at the moment. One of those balls is very definitely not local government. But, like I said, I love this city. My kids are here. Like I said, we have a very, very long association with Napier. My wife's family are Alexanders. We argue around whose family's been in this region longer. Hers has been here at least 150 years. I think mine about 160. But anyway, so at some point in time, once I've finished my business career, it's not out of the realms of possibility that I would seek the mayoralty, but certainly not in the near future.
So not 2025?
Definitely not 2025.
But maybe the next one?
Well, look, maybe not 2028, maybe 2031 or 2034.
How old will you be then?
Yeah, I know. But I'll have a lot more. I'll have wisdom and I'll have time and I'll still have energy.
Yeah.
You see me down at the local gym, still going hard, just in case I need to be there. But it's, I love this city. I think it is the best city in the greatest country in the world. I believe that. It has issues, there's no doubt about that, and it has challenges, and whoever's going to replace me as the MP here has a hard job to do. And being a local MP, it's a lot of work, it really is. But, you may see me as the Mayor, but certainly, we'll put my name forward as the Mayor, but certainly not in the near future.
Yeah. And to the people of Napier, what's your last word to them?
I just want to say, look, thank you very much for allowing me to represent you in Parliament. It has been a privilege and a pleasure. I have never taken it for granted. I apologise when I've got it wrong, because I've never meant to. Just know that I have always worked really, really hard for you, for your best interest, for your family. I don't care who you vote for, but please know that I've had your back at every single moment, every single day that I have been your MP, and I have absolutely loved it. And thank you for allowing me the privilege and the pleasure to represent you.
Stuart Nash, thank you for your time today and all the best for the future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.